Hey, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Brandon Snyder, I'm board president for NAIOP Pittsburgh. I'm also the market leader for Al Nair here in Western Pennsylvania. Welcome everyone from both NAIOP Pittsburgh and the MBA, March chapter meeting on construction forecast and discussion. Our organizations have a lot of overlap, obviously, not only in membership, but also in strategies surrounding creating value to our members. Brandon Mendoza, former executive director with NAIOP Pittsburgh, is now leading public and government affairs for the MBA. While David Dacvalente is the executive director for the MBA, his wife Amanda is NAIOP Pittsburgh's general counsel. So a lot of overlap. It's great to have everyone together. I think these relationships and our common goals will lead to greater communication, unity on issues, efforts, and events moving forward. I'm going to turn it over to the MBA momentarily, but I do want to, who will then introduce today's presenter. But I do want to run through a couple of NAIOP events coming up. First and foremost, thanks to our gavel sponsors listed here and on either side. Our gavel sponsors support our chapter meetings throughout the year. Our next chapter meeting is on April 18th. It is on regional economic development. Our programs committee put forth an impressive panel, including a representative from Ohio's Economic Development Association to discuss the approach that state is taking on landing some of more nationally recognized projects, including the Intel plant north of Columbus. On May 9th, it's our annual awards banquet. This is the biggest event of NAIOP Pittsburgh's year. We have selected our award winners and we've informed them. We'll be making announcements through various avenues, including the Pittsburgh Business Times, in short order. Despite the challenges our industry is facing, we have a lot of projects and a lot of people to recognize this year, which I think says a lot about our region's resolve. Their sponsorship opportunities are still available. Please reach out to Tom Frank, NAIOP Pittsburgh's current executive director, on what opportunities and what levels may be available. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Dacvalente from the MBA. Please welcome David.
Good afternoon. Appreciate everybody being here. I know we had a tremendous turnout, both from NAIOP Pittsburgh as well as from the MBA, and we were this close to needing to expand into the back room. So I'm glad everybody got a seat. And of course, there's plenty up front because whether it's school or church or an event like this, everybody likes to crowd from the back to the front. Appreciate Brandon, the remarks, and Tom and Erica with NAIOP Pittsburgh for helping to put this on, and our staff at the MBA for supporting this. We're excited. We've got a great panel for you all this afternoon. But I do have to say, Brandon and I have been at a lot of events together in the past, but today was the first official conversation that he and I had together. And the overlap that he mentioned is important. I think it symbolizes the region, what is here, what has been here, what we continue to develop and working together from a construction and from a development standpoint. And I know we've got labor partners in the room as well, and that's critical and important for us at the MBA. And so we appreciate everybody's support, but also this continuation and moving forward. We get to build on a great foundation here in Western Pennsylvania. And I know all of us at the MBA and our board of directors are proud to help build on that as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ken Simonson. Ken is the chief economist with AGC of America. Appreciate him coming out for our chapter events and to help inform and educate and engage with our members and NAIOP Pittsburgh here. Ken's been the chief economist at AGC of America, leading since 2001, provides insight into the economy and what it implies for construction and related industries through frequent media interviews, presentations, the data digest with it, which if you're not familiar with it, it's very easy to get on that. All you have to do is email him and he will add you on to the next one. It's really a tremendous weekly e-newsletter that goes out without fail. Ken has over 40 years of experience analyzing, advocating, and communicating about economic and tax issues. Currently serves as an advisor to the Census Bureau's Association for Business Economics and is the co-director of the Tax Economists Forum, a professional meeting group that he co-founded in 1982. Ken has a BA in economics from the University of Chicago and an MA in economics from Northwestern University. Please welcome Ken Simonson.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be back here. I'm impressed that so many of you came out on a rainy afternoon. What I want to talk about today is what's going on with construction nationally. I have a little detail about Pennsylvania, but you'll be hearing next from the experts who are living and breathing that every day. And just as a starter, a little more about AGC. Master Builders is one of 89 chapters around the country. You're also represented here by the Constructors Association of Western Pennsylvania for highway and heavy contractors. And collectively, we have a total of over 26,000 member companies that do every kind of construction other than single family home building. AGC of America is based in Arlington, Virginia. We do the full range of services of a national association, from explaining to Congress and to regulations writers what their legislation, their rules would do to construction, and lots of education programs. So if you're not yet involved with MBA, I hope that you can get involved with them or chapters elsewhere in the country. Let me get into the employment situation first, and then I'll also talk about materials cost and supply chain issues, and where I think the market is headed for different kinds of construction. This slide shows the year-over-year change in construction employment compared to total non-farm payroll employment, that headline figure that you hear about on the first Friday of each month. That's the line in green. And the blue line shows residential construction employment. That's a combination of workers for home builders and multifamily general contractors, plus specialty trade contractors, whether they're working on new homes or additions and renovations to existing ones. The red line puts together non-residential building and specialty trade contractors, plus heavy and civil engineering firms. And you can see that in the first half of this slide, covering the job change from initially January 2021 to January 2022, and then up through the end of 2022, residential construction employment was growing faster than the overall economy. But once the Fed raised those short-term interest rate targets and long-term rates like mortgage rates also jumped up, we did see a big slowdown in single-family home construction, but multifamily has continued at near record levels. So residential construction employment has actually kept pace with total non-farm employment. The big growth has been in non-residential construction employment. It's actually held steady while these other sectors of the economy, while they're still adding jobs, not nearly as much. The far right, you can see that in the last year, non-residential employment has grown at a 3.4% rate nationally, compared to, it's almost double the growth rate in total non-farm payroll employment. Well, bringing it down to Pennsylvania level, you can see that at the beginning of the pandemic, Pennsylvania had one of the steepest drops in employment. I'm sure most of you remember how the governor shut down so much economic activity. And then once he declared that construction was an essential activity and people were able to resume work or start projects that had been frozen, you did see construction employment rebound. But that you've never fully recovered to the point that the country has. The total construction employment nationwide is up about 3%, but in the last year, and up 7% since February of 2020, the month before the pandemic hit. In Pennsylvania, you're still 2.5% below where you were in February of 2020, and about 2% down over the past year. Looking at the metro areas in the state, the broader Philadelphia metro area is down 2%. That includes counties in Delaware and New Jersey, and even the northeasternmost corner of Maryland. Narrowing it down to the city of Philadelphia, their employment is actually up 3% in the last year. Here in Pittsburgh, and again, covering surrounding counties, employment in construction down 3%. Here's how Pennsylvania compares to the rest of the country. And you're not at the bottom. You can see that the bottom 5 states have had job losses in the last year that ranged from 3% in Maryland, 6% in North Dakota. But you're just barely out of that bottom 5, unfortunately. However, some of that job shrinkage is probably due to the inability to find enough workers. We get figures every month from a series called the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, and it shows here in blue the number of job openings at the end of the month nationally in construction. In this case, the month that I've plotted is January each year in the history of the series. And the red line shows the number of people hired over the course of the whole month. Now, it makes sense that in general, where you have a 30 or 31 day month, a lot more hiring than you have openings at the end of the month. But in the last 4 years, that hasn't been the case. The industry has only been able to find half as many people as it wanted to hire. In fact, in January of 2024, we actually had more openings on that single day than we had people hired during the entire month. Now, construction's always been a hard job to get people to be willing to go out and work in all kinds of weather, stay out on the job site no matter what, and often in fairly unpleasant working conditions. And in order to compete with other industries, the industry is paid what I call a wage premium. This can be measured by figures that come out with the employment report called average hourly earnings for production and non-supervisory employees. It's a long mouthful to describe wages paid to craft workers and office workers who aren't supervisors. So I've compared that average earnings in construction to the average for production workers throughout the private sector. And the blue line shows that that premium was always at least 20%. It averaged 21.5% during the 2 decades from 2000 through 2019. But when the pandemic came along and so many of us stayed at home, we didn't want to go into grocery stores or other stores or restaurants. Instead, we were ordering food to prepare at home or ready-made meals, goods to be shipped from warehouses instead of picking them up in stores. Those businesses, warehouses, delivery companies, restaurants that had generally started workers at minimum wage or even less in the case of some tipped restaurant workers, they dramatically increased their starting pay to $14 or even $16 an hour. And as a result, the premium shrank. You can see that red line showing how much more construction paid dropped briefly to 15%. It's come back gradually, but not all the way to where it was before the pandemic. Construction pay has been going up faster than in the broader economy. The box at the lower right shows that in the latest 12 months, construction pay for these non-supervisory workers went up 4.9% over the past 12 months compared to 4.5% for the broader private sector. But I don't think that's enough. I think that the industry is going to have to raise pay even more to attract the workers now that so many other jobs can be done remotely or on a hybrid basis and with flexible hours, things that still aren't possible in construction. Here's the blue line shows what's happened to that average hourly earnings series over the last 4 years, again, going back to February of 2020. And for the last almost 3 years now, it's averaged 5% or more. Meanwhile, materials costs have been on quite a roller coaster. The red line here measures a series called the Producer Price Index for inputs to new non-residential construction. That's a weighted average of the cost of all materials and services such as design and trucking services that go into construction. And you can see at the very beginning, when so much of the economy shut down, prices actually dropped briefly, but then they soared to record levels. We had new records in copper and lumber, and much more frequent and steeper increases than we'd seen before for things as varied as concrete products, gypsum products, insulation, plastic pipe, roofing materials. So for 12 straight months, that red line was increasing at a 20% or greater rate. The last spike occurred after Russia invaded Ukraine a little more than 2 years ago. And then In June of 2022, we started to see prices moderate. In fact, for many months in 2023, that red line was below the 0 point, meaning each month that this weighted average was below the same month a year earlier. In the last few months, it's been creeping up again. And I think later this year, we may see prices going up as much as 4 to 6%. Put that with the wage increases that I think will have to be at least 5%, perhaps as much as 7%. And you have significant inflation going on still in construction. In fact, over the past 4 years, the cost of those inputs has risen a good deal more than bid prices. Now, since I work for the Construction Trade Association, I don't never ask contractors what their pricing is or is going to be. I certainly don't make forecasts about that. But you can see that contractors have not been able to keep up with those increases in materials costs. And so I think there is a significant chance that we will be seeing pass through of price increases to a greater extent this coming year. Not all prices have settled down. This shows that cement prices, which historically would be raised once or twice a year with several months of lead time on those announcements, they've been going up every month, almost every month. They did dip just 0.1% in February of this year, but over the last 12 months, up 6.5%. And that shows up in concrete products. So ready mix has gone up 7.4% in the last year. Now, other things have come down. Diesel fuel down 11%, but just 6 months earlier, it was rising at a 30% year-over-year rate. And in the last few weeks, we've seen diesel prices at the retail level, truck stop level, going up again. So a lot of volatility. On top of that, there's still supply chain issues. Things have gotten a lot better for the most part, thank goodness. But every contractor I talked to, and last week, Dave and I were at the AGC of America convention in San Diego. So I got to talk to contractors in all segments from all over the country. Invariably, if they were buying electrical equipment, they were facing extremely long lead times that have not improved at all in the last year, as much as 80 weeks for switchgear and over 2 years for some transformers. More mundane or generic products in general, the lead times have gotten back to pre-pandemic levels, or at least to closer to that. But there are still some exceptions. One area that I heard mixed reports was with elevator parts, HVAC equipment, other kinds of building electric or electronic controls. Let me switch over to what's going on with construction spending. This is a series the Census Bureau updates on the first business day of each month. So we'll get February figures on Monday morning. What you see here is the change in spending put in place, that is spending on projects underway in these different categories from January of last year to January of this year. And everything's in the black, meaning the numbers have gone up. Now, unfortunately, we don't have an inflation index that works for all types of construction. So these are in current dollars. We can't separate how much is actual new square footage or lane miles of highways, new housing units, hospital rooms, etc. How much is price increase, but it does look pretty favorable. We can get into a lot more detail. The Census Bureau posts over 160 categories of non-residential spending each month. And I won't take you through all of those, but let me just highlight a few things. First, at the top, you can see private residential was up 5%. Even the single family was growing at double-digit rates. That's because in January of last year, we were near the low point of single-family construction activity. And we've actually seen 12 straight months of additional spending now on construction, or not spending, but units. And that's showing up in these spending dollar figures that have been going up for 10 months in a row. And I do think that single family will do better this year than it did in any month last year. Probably not a 13% increase as we start to climb out of the hole that we saw at the beginning of last year, but 5 to 10% increase, pretty healthy. Multifamily, in contrast, while it's up 8% from January to January, it's about to fall off a cliff. We still have a near record number of units under construction, but I think that's largely because of the difficulty getting that switchgear and other electric components. Once those things are installed and the contractor turns over the keys, they won't find another project to start on in quite a few markets. Number of starts, units with starts, and the number of permits being drawn for multifamily projects, both have been declining at a 30% year-over-year rate for quite a while. And so that market is really going to taper off until current units, these new ones that are coming onto the market, get absorbed. And that could take a couple of years. Now, on the non-residential side, we've had very good balanced growth and very strong growth, up 15% for private, 20% for public projects. As you go down the categories, most of them are in black. They're listed in descending order of January 2024 size, and within many of them, in parentheses, you see subcategories also in descending order. The biggest growth has been in manufacturing construction, up 37% year over year, and that's actually come down quite a bit. Within manufacturing, it's led by this computer, electric manufacturing plant category, as epitomized by the enormous Intel project near Columbus, but also major semiconductor and other electronic plants going up north of Albany and other parts of New York State, and in Arizona, Texas, Idaho, Kansas, and Utah. So quite a few different areas. But beyond that, we also have good growth in transportation equipment, the EV and battery plants going up in a number of states. Again, not just in the Southeast, but in a number of Midwestern states also. Chemical construction, that includes things like the Shell ethane cracker plant and things on the Gulf Coast, as well as pharmaceutical plants. But I think that overall manufacturing still has quite a bit of room to run. I don't expect another 37% increase, but I think we will be seeing more plant announcements as businesses bring manufacturing back to the U.S. to get away from actual and potential conflict areas and to be prepared to supply materials for the Build America, under the Build America, Buy America Act. Highway and street construction, up 22%, and that's before most of the money from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has come through. I think the prospects for that are very good for this year and for some years to come. In fact, several other infrastructure categories will be benefiting from that act. Similarly, power construction. We haven't seen many awards under the Inflation Reduction Act. In fact, nothing that I know has been identified under that yet, as we still wait for clarity on tax credits. But I think, again, that area for renewable energy and also for utility scale battery storage projects and transmission projects. Commercial is a term that gets used in a lot of different ways. And for census, it means warehouse, retail, and farm construction. You can see the warehouse still up 2%, but I think that is about to take quite a dive. We've had reports just in the past week from some of the major commercial real estate firms talking about the huge jump in vacancies, the record number of square feet being delivered to the market. It could take years to absorb those. So we will see limited markets where there's still demand for warehouse construction, but by and large, I think that's going to be tapering off quite. Retail, more of a mixed picture. I live in DC. I work in Arlington, Virginia, in a neighborhood that looks like a downtown, and the number of people going back to the offices there and in cities like New York and San Francisco remains very low, 50% of pre-pandemic levels. And that counts the peak days like Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Monday and Friday, it's like a holiday every week. Firms, including our association, our lease will be up in a year or two, and we're looking at space that I think will be significantly smaller than we occupy now. So I think the outlook for retail construction tied to office markets is bleak, but people are working from home and they are going out for lunch, going shopping in the middle of the day where they live rather than going to an office and going outside that building. So some retail is certainly doing well. And I think overall retail is likely to hang close to the zero mark this year. Now, education, certainly an important market here in the Western Pennsylvania area and also through Ohio. You can see higher ed up 19%, primary, secondary up 20%. I don't think that the higher ed is going to hang that high. Some of it is a rebound from the shutdown that occurred at the beginning of the pandemic. When students went home, universities and colleges were refunding tuition and student fees. Once the students came back, they resumed those capital projects. But enrollments nationwide are slipping and have been for a number of years. So I think many colleges, smaller colleges, the community colleges here in Pennsylvania will be consolidating or even closing their doors. The K through 12, though, most regions have seen quite a run up in house prices, and that's translating into higher property tax receipts for school districts that helps them pay for teacher salaries, but also for more construction or reconstruction and expansion. Office, deceptively large positive figure here. This is a market that I just described how dismal it looks for new construction. Yes, certainly some remodeling, some repurposing of offices, although I think that's been more of a talking point and a wished for point by mayors than actual development happening. But the reason this looks good is primarily because office includes data centers. It's been a perpetual frustration to me. Census Bureau doesn't break out data centers, but they did tell me last month that they expect to start doing so. And at that point, this office number will be a big negative. Data centers, I think, are going to be the fastest growing market this year. They may have been last year, if only we had the numbers. But there seems to be unlimited appetite for building data centers. Transportation, other than highways, certainly there's a lot of work going on at airports around the country, and also Amtrak and other rail investment. Transit, however, I think is in deep financial trouble. So that's going to be a mixed picture. Healthcare, hospitals and other medical buildings, certainly extremely important here in the Pittsburgh market. Hospital spending, I think, has had a phenomenon somewhat like colleges and universities, where at the beginning of the pandemic, they had to halt most construction in order to deal with COVID patients. Now they've resumed those capital projects, but I think over the years, more care will be delivered outside of hospitals and standalone clinics and diagnostic and treatment centers. Across the bottom, I've squeezed the smaller categories. We have seen a big growth in wastewater and water treatment, thanks to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This year, it looks like there'll be a big jump in broadband connectivity for places that don't have it yet. And conservation and development. That would be the Corps of Engineers projects on the Ohio River system. So definitely some positives in there. Well, every fall, AGC asks our members nationwide to tell us what they expect in the coming year. And the bars here measure the difference between respondents who think the dollar value of projects available to bid on will increase, minus those who think it will decrease from the year before. Most of the bars nationally are green. Here in Pennsylvania, though, not nearly so optimistic. We got responses from almost 1,300 firms nationwide, including 22 who identified Pennsylvania as their principal market. Nationwide, water and sewer projects were number one. 32% more respondents thought the market would grow than thought it would shrink. These bars don't measure the size of the increase, just the number of optimists minus the number of pessimists. But here in Pennsylvania, respondents were equally divided between the optimists and pessimists. For the next strongest category, transportation, meaning airport, rail, transit, some bus, 30% positive nationally, 33% here in Pennsylvania. So your strongest, your most optimistic market, I should say. Closely followed here by hospital construction and federal. That would be work for the General Services Administration, the Corps of Engineers, including both civil and military projects, agencies like the Department of Veterans Affairs, Naval Facilities and Engineering Command. And then quite positive on other healthcare, even more so in Pennsylvania than nationally. But negative about data centers, quite strongly negative about data centers here, and very negative about manufacturing construction here, even more so about warehouse, lodging, retail, private office. Let me wrap up by talking about where I see the economy headed and construction. A year ago, I spoke to some of you, and I was much more optimistic than most economists, including my friends over at PNC Bank, that I thought that we were going to escape a recession, whereas many economists were saying, oh, we're already in one, we just haven't seen the numbers yet, or it's coming soon. Well, as you know, the year ended on a very strong note for both GDP growth and employment growth. And I think that that's going to continue this year. But I still, and most economists have now come around to the view that if there's going to be a recession, it'll be very short and mild, and there probably won't be one. But we still have a difference of opinion. Most of them a few months ago were saying, oh, the Fed's done raising rates. It's going to cut rates as much as 6 times this year. Well, we've already had a couple of meetings where they held steady. They indicated at the meeting last week that they do expect to cut their short-term interest rate target 2 or 3 times this year, but they're in no rush to do so. And I think that that's going to be the story, that we'll get to the fourth quarter before we see any rate cuts, and maybe 2025, because I think inflation is remaining fairly stubborn. Fortunately, it's not the 9% that consumers were experiencing or the 20% that contractors were experiencing. But I think 3% inflation is about where we are, and getting it all the way down to 2 and staying there will be very difficult. Nevertheless, I think home building, as I said, is going to keep picking up. Home builders have been shrinking the size of houses somewhat, and they've been cutting their prices in order to make housing more affordable. They've even been buying down the mortgage rate for some buyers. So I do think, compared to the very weak numbers last year, single-family home building will be up. But multifamily, as I said, down. Other developer finance categories like warehouse and office also down steeply. Retail, lodging, questionable, probably close to flat. But that's going to be outweighed by huge growth in data centers and manufacturing, selected categories of infrastructure and power-related construction. The biggest challenge for contractors will continue to be labor availability. And I think that's going to persist for a long time. As population growth slows down and as more of the population ages out of working, then it will be even more of a challenge for construction than some other occupations. I can think of some economists who are still doing their thing in their 70s, but not many construction workers out there on a job site that old. So the industry will have a greater challenge than some other businesses. And meanwhile, slowing population growth also means slowing growth in demand for housing, related streets and underground utilities and schools and public safety buildings. But we will continue to see lots of changes in the market for things like how goods are distributed, how power is generated and distributed and stored, and how healthcare is delivered. Finally, here's what's happened to population growth by state. Pennsylvania, like so many of states, all of the states in the Northeast and the Midwest, has had either negative growth, the states in deep red, and you were just barely negative. I had to add an extra decimal point to show that it was a decline, less than 0.1%, but still negative like your neighbors to the north and south, and slow growth through the rest of the Northeast and the Midwest. People are moving to the Southeast. #1 state last year was South Carolina. It just nosed out Florida, which had been #1 the year before. And they're moving from the West Coast to the Intermountain West, and they're moving from all over to Texas. So I do think that these trends are likely to continue, although they did moderate some last year. We had 8 states that lost population last year compared to 18 the year before. And the highest growth states generally grew a little less rapidly than they had the year before. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it till I get new data. When I do, I'll put it in the Data Digest, my weekly summary of economic news relevant to construction. I'd be glad to add any of you to the email list and also send you these slides. Just write me at ken.simonson@agc.org. And now I invite the panel to come up and join me.
I have a big mouth, as most people in the room know, but I'm thinking when you use mics. It's working now. Okay. Thank you. So thank you, Ken, for your insights and remarks on a national and local level. So I'm your moderator today for, I know many of you in the room here, but my name's Alyssa Kunselman. I'm Director of Business Development at Mascaro Construction. We're a family-owned general contractor, construction manager that specializes in the commercial and heavy industrial markets, located in the north side. Again, family owned. The 3rd generation is working for us now. So great company. And I'm a proud Pittsburgh. I'm secretary of the board of directors here and on the programs committee. And Mascaro is very proud to be a member of AGC, MBA, and NAIOP. So here is our panel. Jen Landau, Executive Vice President of Landau Building Company, and Eric Pascucci, President of PJ Dick. So could each of you please just talk about a little bit about your backgrounds and your roles at your respective companies, please? Hi. Hello, hello. Hello. There we go. Hi, guys. I'm Jen Landau with Landau Building Company. We are a general contractor, construction manager as well. We've been around since the 1890s. Right now, we're in the 5th generation is running it, and I would be the 6th generation. So one of the oldest companies in the Pittsburgh area. We specialize mostly in healthcare, higher education, light industrial work, and some commercial. We're very involved with the Master Builders Association, and we do work mostly in the Western Pennsylvania, Northern West Virginia markets. I myself, I'm a Pitt grad. I got both my undergraduate and my graduate degrees from University of Pittsburgh. Civil engineer, construction management is what I focused on. Been in the industry since 1999. I started as a co-op student back when I was at Pitt, actually, and I've never left. So it's a little bit about me. What about you?
Yeah, so I'm Eric Pascucci. I'm president of PJ Dick. I think most of you know who PJ is, but started in 1979. I think we're in our 45th year. Obviously, a pretty large general contractor. We do everything from construction management, design, build, pretty much hit all the markets, mostly in Western Pennsylvania. We do have an office in Exton, which is out near Philadelphia, and we also do a lot of work in West Virginia. Myself, I've been with PJ for 25 years, been in the industry for 30. I've kind of run the gamut of working at PJ as far as project manager. I ran our small projects group. I ran the estimating department for about a decade, and I've been president since May.
Great. Thank you both. All right, we're going to delve into the questions for our panelists now. So with interest rates remaining high, the liquidity crunch is affecting developers and institutional builders. How is that constraint affecting your firms? And Ken, how is it for construction firms on a more macro level?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the big thing for us in what do you call it, the liquidity crunch. A lot of the stuff that we do for private developers obviously has been put on hold, right? So the combination of the interest rates, the rising construction costs has made a lot of pro formas not really work out. So a lot of the projects that we've been looking at, a lot of developers that we work for, they have things kind of ready to go, but they need both from a financial perspective, on the construction costs for them to, a lot of things to happen to get them to, get a shovel in the ground. Fortunately, at least for our industry, the construction industry, the amount of, I'll call it higher ed work, institutional work, and even now a lot of the public stuff has really stepped in to fill the void from a work, for the amount of work that's available. So we really haven't been impacted too much by it, other than the fact that we've had to switch gears and probably chase or do a little bit more public work than we normally would have versus doing a lot of the developer driven stuff.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of the larger project, our large scale projects, kind of a mid-sized company. Those have still been going forward. So that actually has gone up for us. It's what we've seen, the decrease in a lot of the smaller projects that we're used to doing. A lot of those have been put on hold to make way, I think, for the our clients to do their big projects that need to happen, more of their kind of keystone type projects they want to move forward. So that's it's been a change for us to see a lot more of the larger scale projects versus the smaller. Now, I'd say over the past 2 months, though, I have seen a lot of those smaller scale projects that have been put on hold or were delayed are now starting to come back. And I don't know if it's because maybe some of the huge projects in Pittsburgh are now kind of evening out. Things are, everyone's figuring out where the budgets are on our big scale projects. But I am seeing it to slowly start to increase for, the say 3 to 5 million and under projects. I see more of those coming out now.
I've been surprised that we have not seen a drop off project announcements. We certainly have heard projects being put on hold, but very few cancellations. I think there is some wishing going on there. However, I think that some of these projects just are not going to come back. I'm glad to hear that you're finding that they are coming back. And I think that institutional and government owners are much less affected by the tightening of credit standards, the rise in interest rates. If anything, it's given them more contractors to bid on their projects. Are looking for public work to make up for those things they thought they were going to be busy on the privates.
Okay, thank you all. So we touched on this a bit. We know that demand is still there for projects. So what does your project backlog look like for our two?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of mentioned it before, but right now our backlog's actually very good. We've had a couple large scale projects start within the past year, and I've got a lot of, most of our industry is healthcare. We do a lot of healthcare. So we've got a couple large projects going on. We are seeing a lot of the more community-based medical office building. We're seeing a lot of that come to fruition. We're seeing a lot of, in the medical industry, we're seeing a lot of MRI, CT scanners, kind of replacements that come around every so many years. I'm seeing a lot of that hit right now as well. And as far as higher education goes, the local colleges seem to be doing a lot of work. Your Pitt, your CMU, kind of our big universities in the area are continuing to do work. A lot of them have a lot of infrastructure upgrades, mechanical equipment, electrical equipment, which, yes, there are long lead times. So we're seeing a lot of them go out now, knowing full well that this stuff isn't necessarily going to happen until 2025.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the same boat. I mean, I think for us, 2023, we actually, from a volume perspective, was probably the highest that we've ever done. Now, part of that is an inflationary result because everything costs more. But we basically have a very similar backlog for this year, and we're in really pretty good shape for 2025. But a lot of that is driven by, some of the size of the projects that we're involved with. I mean, the airport, Presby, all the stuff at Pitt and CMU, and even PWSA now, Alcosan. I mean, there's been a lot of very large projects that have started in, I'll call it previous years that are going to take, 3 and 4 years to build. And that backlog, stays on the books for a very, very long time. So for that part, we're actually in fairly good shape.
Are you seeing any evidence of what I said I expect to see happening of the smaller college the smaller hospitals closing or consolidating, but more care being delivered through specialized facilities outside of hospital?
I'm seeing more focus on the specialized facilities, not necessarily closing any hospitals, but I do see the focus kind of adjusting to a population who maybe doesn't want to go into town to go get a test done. So I do see a lot of the community hospitals. I see that going up.
Yeah, there is a trend, hospitals, especially calling the outskirts. But most of the two large, obviously, hospital providers in Pittsburgh they still are in the middle of big projects or are planning big projects. So
Okay, Ken touched on this during his presentation, but we all know since the pandemic, material costs have been major issues for owners and builders. It seems for the most part, a lot of these costs have decreased, but what are some of the materials that are still being affected?
I think what's kind of funny is I hear people say all the time, I was like, oh, I heard the prices all came down. And the reality is they didn't really come down. What happened is that we're not afraid that we're going to wake up tomorrow and the price is going to be 12% higher than it was the day before. And that's what we went through for 2 years, is that, the prices were going up faster than you could even turn in a price for. The bid was about as good as the piece of paper, wasn't as good as the piece of paper was written on. So what we found is, for the most part, at least things have steadied to the point where you're not afraid to turn in a price because you're afraid that the material price is going to go through the roof in the next 2 months, 6 months. And we've obviously all gotten a lot smarter of trying to how to lock that stuff in. Pre-pandemic, we never really had those issues, but I mean, I use steel, for example. Pre-pandemic, I could buy steel, have it fabricated and erected for somewhere around $3,200 a ton all day, every day. And you can't do that today for under, $5,500 a ton. And that's basically the difference between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And, it's not coming down anytime soon.
No, it's stabilized maybe,
Yeah.
it's not, I don't think we're ever going to see material costs.
Okay, staying on the materials discussion, product lead times also increased, which Ken also talked about. Have most of the items adjusted back to what we would call normal lead time, and what products are still causing you and your team some headache?
Go ahead.
So I think we all know the mechanical and electrical equipment. I don't think it's ever going to change at this point. I think all owners are going to have to realize that we need to order things a year in advance. We really need to do a lot of pre-planning, a lot of pre-release, prior to maybe necessarily drawings getting done, or, the complete design being ready to go out is, let's release this equipment. I've heard the same about elevators. I've had mixed experiences with it. Some have been bad, some have been okay. But in general, I mean, the lead times also stabilized. Are they back to, can I call and get something tomorrow? Probably not. Drywall paint, things that maybe during the pandemic, your more residential materials that we did have a hard time getting at that during the middle of the pandemic, those are more readily available now. Lumber, which shot way up because everybody was building decks, right? Like that's kind of back to a normal price that we're used to seeing. But lead times in general, it does take longer to get things these days.
Yeah, I would say anything that gets manufactured and then delivered to your job site seems to still be a problem, whether it's a transformer, a switch gear, we talked about elevators, but pumps, generators, anything that basically has multiple parts coming from all over the world and then getting assembled someplace and being shipped to your job site. That is it's a year plus to get any of that stuff.
Let me ask you about a couple other products that had just a smattering of reports on. I get dear valued customer letters forwarded to me occasionally, and would glad to see any from you. The one that came a month ago announced that all the gypsum manufacturers had raised their prices 20%. So this wallboard distributor was going to put in a 20% increase on March 1st. Do you know if that happened? And then the other, I heard a few reports about huge demand for mineral wool insulation, that suddenly there are two manufacturers of it, in fact said, we're cutting off orders. We're not going to be delivering on the schedule we said we would. We'll let you know when we'll take orders again. We just can't keep up with them.
I haven't heard the gypsum one personally.
I haven't either. I heard one supplier mention it, but then everyone else that I've asked hasn't seen it. So I have not
Good.
seen it actually happen.
Yeah, and the mineral wool, I mean, that's been a problem. I mean, on and off. Yeah. So it's not a surprise. I think that they, again, as things keep ramping up, they can't keep up. So that one, I mean, that happened to us, I think probably a year and a half ago where we had jobs that, we couldn't close in areas because we couldn't insulate them. So.
Are you able to substitute another product at all, or you just have to wait?
Are there any architects in the room that could answer that question?
Should we answer this in front of the architects is the better question.
Okay, another driver of higher project costs have been increases in labor costs. Are you seeing a correction in the rising wage rates?
Well, I don't know what correction means.
Yeah,
but-
that's a loaded question.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, primarily, as everybody knows, Pittsburgh's going an aging population, the demand for construction continues to rise. So it's no surprise that there is a, I don't want to use the word shortage, but we struggle to have enough manpower covering all the projects that we have. If you look at the amount and the size of the projects that are going on currently, I mean, I think the airport right now has 500 guys, or 500 workers. Presby's at 250 and climbing. I mean, there's just so many big projects that are, still a year, 2 years away from being complete that are just have such a high demand of people. So I know that, I don't want to answer 3 questions, but I know that there's a big drive to, to try to, to get more construction labor, to entice them to tell them what a good career it is. And I think that's really, really important for us to keep hitting this demand because, I mean, as I say, as the folks are getting older, we're seeing, really good qualified people that have been running projects for a long time starting to retire, and we're trying to incentivize them to not retire. So we're going through all of those struggles, just trying to keep the folks that we have to continue to work.
Yeah, I mean, our labor force, we use mostly union labor here, so our agreements, I think, are very fair. I think that, we're trying to entice more people into the industry. So I think that, having a skilled workforce that is trained and is safe and knows what they're doing, is worth it. It's an industry that's it's very, it's difficult. It's, we need people to be safe. I mean, it's hard work. So I think that, what we're paying people, is worth it. And I don't think that's going to change. Same with people in the office, like you said, we're having a hard time finding people, not just in the field, but also in the office. And look around, costs more to live nowadays. So I don't see the labor wage changing.
Yeah, the one shift I have seen too is part of the shortage is, I'll call it the post-pandemic view of working overtime. There seems to be a less of a desire. I'll go back in the day, 25 years ago, people wanted to work on your jobs only if you were offering overtime. They wanted to work 50 hours a week. They wanted the time in the house, but nowadays it's that they don't, I think that there's a mental shift where they're happy, going to work their 40, be done. And if you need more guys, sorry, I keep saying guys, if you need more workers,
I haven't kicked him yet.
you should. If you need more workers, well, then get more workers. We're not going to work Friday. You're not going to work 5 10s on a Saturday.
Right. The more the home life balance, I think, is kind of come into everybody's mind that they don't want to work all weekend. They need to go home and have a little bit more of a balance.
Eric, you touched on this during that last question about workforce development. What are your firms doing in that space to be creative, to attract and retain people in this field?
We do a couple of things. I mean, we actually have a kind of a high school recruiting summer program where we bring in high school kids into our office for a week and basically treat them like, like interns and kind of show them the ropes and take them on job site tours and kind of show them how cool it is, like how to be part of, building something cool and being part of it. So we've gone through, those types of programs over the summers. We certainly support all of the high school, I'll call it recruiting types of situations where, we'll attend some of those events in high schools trying to get people to talk about going into the trades or what professions there are in our industry, even if you go to college and get a degree and what can you do with it. So we're trying, at least on our end, to try to, from a smaller scale, just get it out there that, hey, there's a really good career available to you if you choose this path.
Yeah, we've worked with the Pittsburgh Builders Guild. I know they go out to a lot of the high schools and try to, get the word out. Obviously the MBA has a workforce development program that they've been working hard on getting the word out. think one of the biggest things is trying to explain to people that, construction encompasses so many different types of jobs. And a lot of young people don't realize that, you could be in accounting, you can be in marketing, you can be, project management, you can be in estimating, you can be in the field, you can be an electrician, you can be a carpenter. I mean, there's so much different things that you could be involved at, and just kind of getting the word out there and have people understand that it's a pretty fun industry to get into if they realize it.
Anything to add? You can, okay. Skip the Economist. Okay, what kind of funding sources do you anticipate being used for your future projects? How significant will public subsidies and tax credits be for these projects? And this threefold question. Any comments on the RCAP or Redevelopment Assistance Capital Program by Governor Shapiro? So
We do a decent amount of work with RCAP, and I'm going to keep calling it RCAP and not RACP because I think that sounds weird. But there's a shift and people call it that now. I do think that Governor Shapiro did streamline the process, which is great because a lot of our experience with it is with some smaller entities, whether it be libraries or churches or historic buildings that really, it's a lot of work to get the paperwork done. I mean, that's a full-time job right there. So I'm hoping it does help get more people involved in it and more people able to use the money. I've heard a little bit about this ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, which has something to do with COVID fiscal recovery funding. I've had a couple clients start looking into that. Now I haven't seen that come to fruition yet, but I think that those are going to come into play here with interest rates the way that they are, that people are going to be looking for assistance.
Yeah, I think any of the programs that help fill that funding gap are, really important for both the private side and, some of the public institutional stuff. I think a lot of these projects wouldn't get off the ground if they didn't have, $1 million or a $2 million grant from the, I call it RCAP too. I think, there's certainly other programs out there that can help a lot of these developments. And I think the city itself has to look at what they can do, especially for all of these buildings downtown, to provide some assistance to make, the owners of these buildings have the ability to do something with them.
that's a great entree into my next question. It's like we planned these questions. How are you viewing the high cost of office building retrofits to multifamily in downtown? Outside of public funding, do you see any alternative funding sources out there that can help make these projects pencil out?
The funding source certainly is not my area of expertise, but the one thing that I look at, because we've looked at quite a few of these, and I think some of them are pretty good opportunities. But I think the first, just not to get into the weeds or be too technical, but, not every building that's downtown is a good fit for residential, right? So those buildings that have the right geometry that it can actually put efficient apartment units or living units in them are the ones that, can probably figure out how to get over the hump. I mean, but I think there's a lot of other buildings that I think repurposing them in apartments probably just isn't going to work, just because it's going to cost too much. You're going to have units that don't make any sense. You're going to have, 2,000 square foot apartment that has 2 windows in it. So I think the idea of transforming any building downtown into an apartment building's not viable. I think there are a number of buildings in town that probably make sense. And I think if they make sense from the, I call it the geometry and the efficiency, then with a little bit of help from the city, could probably make these work.
Yeah, I think that we're going to need to think outside the box. Like you said, not all the buildings are going to work residentially. So there's a lot of money that's going to need to go into those, just in abatement costs and aging infrastructure that need to go into that. So I think really we need to start thinking holistically of maybe that's not the only answer.
How about you, Alyssa? Have you seen any projects that are viable that way?
Not currently, kind of about them, but we're not currently working on any.
In DC, where I live, the mayor has been quite outspoken and highlighted a project downtown that is underway. She said that there are 11 of them, which is the most of any city, but I'm not convinced that they'll all go ahead. They've been announced, but or speculated on.
All right, one more question for our panelists before we turn it over to you, the audience. So I know that none of us are Nostradamus or like to play him on a panel. But what do you see happening in the markets in the next year based on the trends that we discussed today?
Sure.
Well, as I said, I think it's going to be very mixed. I think it's going to be rough for a lot of the income producing properties, but should be stronger on things that are getting federal funding. We hear announcements every week from the administration. Now, those don't necessarily turn into actual contracts, but clearly more federal money is being pushed toward a wide variety of project types. And I do think that we'll see a considerable pickup there. I think also alternative energy and manufacturing will continue to get a lot more projects in many parts of the country.
I mean, I can only speak from, the view of a construction company. With what I know or what we've been told is out there and upcoming in all the different sectors we talked about, whether it's healthcare, institutional or public, and if you just the headlines of what's in the paper of those folks and what they're planning to build, the outlook actually looks pretty good for most contractors. There's going to be plenty of work. Now we have our challenges in doing that work and making money at it, but there's plenty of work to do, so to speak. The interesting thing about the construction market is that we're always behind. We're 18 months to 2 years behind any other major economic impact because our deals are done. We have contracts. We have to go build a building. It doesn't matter if a recession hits tomorrow, we still have to go finish our thing. So usually with us, depending on what the size of the blip is, whether it's a small, short recession and we have enough big work, we can kind of ride it out. In the next 6 to 9 months, if the things happen that everybody's been talking about should happen, and all of us contractors get our fair share of those things, I don't know that we have any real scare until, call it the middle of 25 or 26, when we start burning off all the work that we currently have.
Yeah, I'd remain cautiously optimistic because, you think of the big projects that are going on right now, the airport, that's going to bring in industry. We've got the meds and eds that in Pittsburgh does an amazing job. They're bringing in a ton of people. Our high tech, the CMU are bringing in all of these new startup companies, the high tech. I don't think they're going to go away. Or, going into brownfields, we're finding new ways to, reinvent the city. I think that we're doing pretty good. And I think we have like you said, at least till 2025, things are looking pretty good right now. I feel good about it. We've made it through some real rough times, Pittsburgh as a city. And I think we'll keep doing that.
Okay, thank you all. At this point, we're going to now turn it over to the audience for questions.
I just have a comment. Steve Mazza, Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters. I want to thank the panel, our industry partners in the room for providing work for our 4,500 members in and throughout the city of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County. We are bringing about 40 apprentices in a month with our outreach. We work with breaking the chains of poverty, intro into the trades, the city, Pittsburgh Public Schools, all our pre-apprenticeship programs that try to make it a lot easier and smoother for our contractors.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So definitely a question for the economist.
We're all hiding from Mr. Bird.
At the risk of asking you to speak for someone else, the conditions you described sound like they could be quite a strain on the specialty contractors. What's your sense of, without speaking for your, people you work with, what's your sense, at least from a pricing and a response standpoint? Are you starting to see some of that strain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
It's going to be a struggle, I think.
yeah, I think it's going to be a struggle for quite a while.
Yeah.
I think our specialty contractors right now have, I hate to say the word maxed out, but I think they've realized that, they have a lot of work and they have a lot of work for a significant period of time. And we're really starting to see that in the prices that we get. We're also starting to see it on the amount of people that are interested in bidding on a project. I think the market and what we do is driven by competition. And when you would normally get, 4 or 5 electrical bids on a project and you're basically getting 2 or 3 and you had to beg the third guy to show up, that, just the basis of supply and demand will force that price up. So, I think a lot of them are basically at capacity. They're trying to figure out how to finish the work they have, how to man the jobs they have. And, and they're probably being a little leery about taking on more work especially big work in the upcoming future.
Seeing the same thing on my end too.
I've always been told that when times get good is when subcontractors get into trouble.
Correct.
They overbid, and I have not been hearing those stories of subcontractors failing at this point. Do you think it's any different?
We're not at the failing point yet, but I think they're getting maxed out.
Yeah,
So
I would
we got to be careful moving forward for
Correct.
sure.
Ken made an interesting point at the very beginning, talking about some of the federal funds and the programs that were passed a year or more ago haven't really hit the market yet. And one of the problems philosophically with fiscal policy is by the time the fire hose is turned on and hits the market, do you feel like that's going to reignite inflation? I don't see how it can't, but does that bother you as an economist?
Yeah, I do think that we've already seen crunch hit semiconductor fabs or some of the EV plants, that those schedules have slipped because they can't find enough of the specialized workers, or perhaps they all are ordering equipment from the same few suppliers, and so these lead times jump on that. And I think that's likely to show up in other areas. 2 years ago, I was getting more and more reports as the year went on about shortages of cement, or allocation for ready mix pours. You could only get 60% of the trucks that you wanted. If you had dealt with that company before, if you were new to the market, you were completely out of luck. Fortunately, last year, things seem to have normalized, but we haven't been adding cement capacity for 15 years. And meanwhile, the number of big projects, the amount of infrastructure, the scale of the energy projects and the manufacturing projects keeps growing. So I think we're going to hit a crunch at some point again, at least in some regions with cement and concrete. I was just reading today that the Mississippi, Ohio, Missouri river system may be in a drought situation for the third straight year, and that limits the amount of cement shipments that can come up from St. Genevieve, Missouri, or move around other parts of the Midwest. So that's the sort of thing that could definitely trigger problems getting that kind of delivery. And there are other materials that I had never heard of before that suddenly were a problem area at different times. A beetle that produced the coloring for the highway striping material was suddenly a problem for a year or two.
Yeah,
And,
beetles.
there are just all kinds of weird things that can happen. A freeze in Texas that shuts down the production of the resins for plastic pipe. So I think you have to assume that either because of a surge in supply or some unexpected bottleneck in the supply chain, that we're going to have a problem.
Any other questions?
Quick question for Eric on that you guys are involved in the center of the highway. Thinking of the infrastructure money that you spoke about earlier. Have you guys seen any of that allocated towards any of your projects? And secondly, I was at another forecasting event, and the city of Pittsburgh said they only have $18 million to spend this year on their bridges and projects. So I'm wondering if you have seen or heard about that money being allocated anytime soon. Will any of that go to the city of Pittsburgh? But we all know the state of the bridges.
Well, I apologize. So I work for PJ Dick. So I work on the vertical building side. So I don't really, I hate to say don't pay too much attention to the Trumbull side, but I'm not involved in their day to day. So I'm not really in that circle.
What I've heard nationally is very few highway contractors, and we asked about this in our survey for 2 years in a row. It's a very small percentage of the contractors said that they had won projects or even seen projects available to bid on under the IIJA. An exception to that, I think, is water and wastewater, where the state revolving funds received a big boost. The method for awarding that money hadn't changed for the most part. I think the expansion of the Build America, Buy America Act has created problems. That, as I understand it, there's certain equipment that goes into those treatment plants, or perhaps the pumping equipment that is not available or very limited availability from U.S. suppliers. And the waiver process has been very cumbersome and still being worked out and understood by the agency. So I think there are problems there, but nevertheless, more projects have come out in that area than in the highway area or some of the others. And I also mentioned broadband, that it looks like this year there will be a lot more of that build out to areas that don't have high-speed broadband. But that's a small market compared to, again, to highways or some of the other infrastructure.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. How about a round of applause for our panel? Yeah, thank you all for your insight and your preparation. It showed. Really appreciate it. One last announcement. When you exit these doors, you'll see a bar. Do not panic. There is another one. The main bar in the restaurant is open, so we'll see you out there for happy hour. Thanks so much for coming.